the day 5 of Welcome to the day 5 of 10 days capacity building program on legal research jointly organized by Rabindranath Tagore University and Law Teachers India. I am Shubhra Singh, Assistant Professor, Sage University, Bhopal, your moderator for this evening session. It is my privilege to introduce our eminent speaker, Dr. Harsh Mahaseth sir. Dr. Harsh Sir is an associate professor at Jindal Global Law School, associate director of the Neginpao Kipgen Center for Southeast Asian Studies, and senior research fellow at the Center for Alternative Dispute Resolution, OP Jindal Global University, India. He is a visiting faculty at Nalsar University of Law. He has also served as an assistant dean at OP Jindal Global University and has taught as a visiting faculty at Mahindra University. Recognized among the top cited international law scholars in India by the Indian Blog of International Law, Sir is noted alongside leading legal luminaries in the country. He specializes in public international law with a particular focus on Asian legal studies across South and Southeast Asian countries. I once again welcome you, sir. The stage is yours.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you everyone for joining this session. Namaste, everyone. Thank you so much to the organizers, and of course, thank you so much to Dr. Gupta for always uh, supporting these initiatives and always inviting me for them. So, my name is Harsh Mahaseth, and today I will be looking at how to write a quality research article for law journals, selecting the right law journal for publication. So let me just share my screen and I'll just show you the PowerPoint that I have for this. Okay. So yes, when I first got this topic, the first thing I thought of was this is a lot of information that I need to summarize in 1 hour. So the way that I want to take this forward is maybe the first half, I want to look at how to select a topic as well as the structure of a law journal, which is the first half of what I was asked to speak on. And the second half an hour, would be looking at how to select a journal, what things should we look at, and also, as mentioned in the brochure as well, some common pitfalls of this as well. So, without further ado, the first thing that I want to look at over here is, let me just move this here. The first most important thing to do would be to identify a topic. And I believe that this is the most important thing in a research paper because at the end of the day, if you have a very strong research topic that is innovative, then a journal will more or less try to support you in the publication process, even if there are a lot of issues with it. So, to give an example, let's say that I might have, and this is something that I remember very fondly because in my second year of law school, when I was an undergraduate student, I had written an article along the lines of this was for my sociology research project, and I had written on if I don't remember exactly, I think it was the different interpretations of crime because I was looking at the Nepal-India blockade of 2015, I think. So I thought it was a very strong research paper and I had sent it out to a journal and it was very shocking to see that as a second year law student, this had been accepted with major revisions, of course, at one of the leading journals in the world itself. And it was shocking to me to see that a place that accepts articles only from professors and scholars, which was a US journal, by the way, this was the Berkeley Journal of Sociology, was actually considering a second year law student's topic. And that made me realize that there are many journals in the world that do not actually care about which stage you are in your professional career or even in your studies. What they care about is how innovative your topic might be. And so, honestly speaking, the first most important thing as I come back is to identify a topic. And the topic usually you get a great topic only in an area that interests you. So no matter how much I would try, let's say that I do a lot of research in public international and environment law because those areas interest me a lot. However, if someone really asks me to research on maybe, let's say, competition law, I would not be able to do much in that area because I don't have an interest in that area and I haven't even studied that area. So it's always very important to first identify an area that interests you, and then, of course, identify a specific topic within it, and then to find your research question. For this, it's very similar to how we have the golden triangle in constitutional law. I came up with this myself. So this is as per my own experience that I believe these are three things that are required in a research topic. And so they are contemporary relevance, that being that whatever you're researching on has to be relevant to present day society. Even if, let's say, you're looking at something from a historical lens, that might be one of the exceptions to it. However, most of the cases, you need to have something that is of contemporary relevance. If a law has been repealed 10 years ago, there is no point in writing that the law should be repealed or why it has been repealed 10 years later. Could maybe write about what impact it has had since 10 years of that judgment, which is a very interesting way to take it forward. So, for example, contemporary relevance, let's say Section 377, Navteej Singh Johar, that is 2017-2018. So writing about why 377 should be removed now does not make sense because we don't no longer have 377. However, talking about what has happened since Navteej Singh Johar, what policies have come in place, could be something you can look at because that is of contemporary relevance. And so that's the first edge of your triangle or first corner. The second one is specificity, because at the end of the day, you need to have a very specific research question. If it is too broad, it always always lacks that specificity, but also it leaves a lot of space for a lot more research that could have been put into your paper as well. And so you need to have a very specific, definite research question. Do not keep it too broad. So you can't just say, let's say, analyzing the role of digital technology in legal education in India. That sounds very broad. Or let's say maybe analyzing the Environment Protection Act, that in itself is a huge legislation. Maybe you would want to look at one very specific provision or maybe one very specific research question. So as specific as you can make the research question, that is better because you would need to understand that a specific research question can have 5,000, 8,000 words. But if it's a very general area of law, you can very easily write a PhD thesis or even books on it. So if you actually want to write about, let's say, constitutional law and the Constitution of India, it's such a broad thing that there are so many commentaries on it. But maybe you'd want to make it more specific and look at something, one particular article in that, and even in that, an interpretation of that article. So make it as specific as possible. And third is novelty. And when I say novelty, I don't mean that it always has to be a specific area where there has been no research done at all. It could always mean a novel idea within an argument as well. So let's say that let's say, for example, and just coming back to the same topic of 377, I feel that it's a very overdone topic by now because even in our different law schools across India, we see that if there is a research paper component to criminal law, then at least one student in every single year writes about it. Very similar to how every year one person would write about marital rape as well. So these have become overdone topics, but that does not mean that you should not write upon these topics. It is important to write on these topics, but it's always important to find that novel approach, novel idea, novel argument. All of us, or many of us, would say that, let's say, marital rape should be criminalized. 377 should have been removed, which many papers would say. However, maybe an argument used in your paper would be very different from what most of the papers use. And so a novel approach is very important. To give you an example of this, an example that I use a lot is, let's say, the research that I'm doing on marital rape itself. Marital rape, if you just Google marital rape India, you will find hundreds of articles. Many of them are even student papers. Um, in these hundreds of articles, how can we identify something novel? Now, the angle that I had pitched, which is again something that does not have much research and is something that can be looked into, is looking at a comparative analysis of India and Nepal to understand, even though there are similar cultures, and while the laws are a bit different, but when we do say roti beti ka rishta, when there is such close cultural ties, why is it that one country has criminalized it, being Nepal, while the other has not criminalized it? So maybe looking at that makes it a novel idea because no one has actually looked into that. So that's a good research question to look into. And of course, if there is no research on that, then definitely that is novel because many people have not looked into it. So one of my areas of specialization is, as was mentioned at the start as well, looking at Asian legal studies through South Asia. So I do a lot of research on SARC. There is very little research that is actually done on SARC. And so half the time, whenever I'm even interpreting or looking at the agreements made by SARC, there is very little research that has been conducted on it, and in itself becomes a novel idea to work on. So, if you have these three components of contemporary relevance, specificity, and novelty, I believe that most of the journals, even if your paper is lacking some research, would very happily accept your paper subject to, let's say, major revisions. And that is always a good sign because that shows that the journal is interested in your paper and will actually work with you on the paper, providing you feedback, which is the best type of, which is actually a very good way forward as well. So, this is a very important aspect. And if you have a great research topic or research idea, that is at least half the work done in trying to get your paper accepted. Of course, you have a very long journey after this as well, but identifying a good topic is very important and it's very tough to do as well. So for this, what really helps me at least is reading through anything that interests me. So I usually tend to look at very, let's say, up-to-date blogs and of course newspapers. And based on them, I get a lot of my ideas. So rather than looking at mainly research papers, I first look at the current affairs through newspapers and blogs. And through that, I get the idea and then I source that through the research papers. And so what I usually do is I write down pointers, which I have now started to do on my email. So I make a draft and I write down everything there. I write down questions that I might have had from whatever I was reading, because all the time, whenever I'm reading something, I always have a lot of questions. So I note down those questions. And based on those questions, I build upon it and I make my research questions. And of course, as I mentioned, remember that your final research question needs to be specific and answer one particular question. Because at the end of the day, a research paper is between 5,000 to 8,000 words in most of the places. So, that being said, once you have an idea in your head, the next thing that we have to look at is what all is a part of a research paper. Because many places have many different understandings of what all should be there. Is there actually one common fits it all idea of a structure? And that is what I wanted to discuss, at least for the next, let's say, 10, 15 minutes. So, what all should be included in a research paper is a question that comes. Are all of these requirements for it to be called a complete research paper? Or if one of it is not there, does that mean it's not a research paper? For this, there are a couple of things that we look at, and these are the contents of a research paper. And according to me, even if the heading is not there, in essence, all of these do become a part of a research paper. And I will explain what I mean in the coming slides. But what are these? Abstract, which is very important, is necessary everywhere. An introduction is necessary everywhere. Methodology and literature review are the two let's say, outstanding factors of a research paper, which I think are very underrated, but they form a very huge part of research. And then, of course, an analysis is very important, meaning your main research point. And this is different for different research papers. And this could be several headings and subheadings, and arguments for and against whatever research you have seen, your opinion, because at the end of the day, a research paper needs to have your opinion and a conclusion. So I will break down the first four or three parts of these, but not the remaining, because let me just briefly say, an introduction is always a descriptive part of a paper which does not take much time, honestly. An introduction is basically you looking at other sources and then just creating your introduction based upon that descriptive information that is out there. Your analysis is very specific to your research question, and so there is nothing much that I can do in an analysis as well. Arguments for and against, again, same, that whatever your research question is will have arguments for and against. And it's always important, and I always mention this, it's always important not only to give the arguments that support your idea, but also to give the arguments that are against your idea. Why do I say this? I say this because if you give those arguments that are against your idea and then you rebut them, that bolsters your position further. So it's very important that you give both sides of the argument and then you rebut one side, which makes your point stronger. Your opinion, of course, is yours, and a conclusion is basically the summary of the entire paper and giving your opinion or the main point again in the conclusion. So over here, there are three things that just need a brief discussion, which is abstract, methodology, and literature review. And out of these, I think all three of these are very important parts of the research paper. Of course, that's not to say that the others are not. An analysis and an opinion is. However, that's not something that I can talk about that easily or in this limited time. So I will focus on the abstract methodology and literature review. So coming to the first of these three is abstract. What is an abstract? What all should be included in this abstract? And why is an abstract important are three questions that we need to answer. So I haven't mentioned that. So an abstract basically is, let's say, a primer of what your research paper is about. So it's basically to entice your readers into reading your research paper. Because in this day and age where anyways research papers are not being read as much as they used to before, the abstract is the reason why someone might read your paper. And that is where they will read the abstract of your 200 to 50 words and they will decide whether they want to invest the next 20 to 30 minutes in reading your entire research paper or not. And so that is why an abstract is very important because it can be a make or break. If your abstract is really great, maybe there will be more people who are reading an entire paper. But if the abstract itself doesn't is very lackluster and does not explain what all you're doing in your research paper, many people might not even read the full paper. Now, that's why I think that is what an abstract is and why it is important. What all should be added in this, I have given through an example of one of my research. So if you have a look, there are three parts to my abstract over here. And I'll just read this out very quickly, and then I'll just explain what these are. So this was one of the papers that I had written on Muslim personal laws in India. And this was very much rooted in the triple talaq debate in India. So if I could just read this out. Research on Muslim personal laws in India is not as vibrant as the other areas of laws. MPL, Muslim personal laws, are seen as regressive, patriarchal, and the need to be reformed. However, due to the lack of knowledge on personal laws, there has been a misconception regarding them. This paper will look at how the law of divorce in the MPL work in India. The author intends to look at the use of talaq and how India legal norms are made and also looking at the institutional influence, role of state-sponsored institutions, the composition of the benches of the higher judiciary, and their familiarization with the sources of MPL. Chapter 1 will introduce the MPL in India. Chapter 2 will look into the common notion of MPL being considered static and disprove the same by looking at developments of certain principles of MPL in India. The codification or elaboration of Islamic law in India over time has undergone a dynamic change. Chapter 3 will interpret the different sources of MPL to see the validity of talaq-e-biddat, also known as triple talaq. Chapter 4 will analyze the cases relating to talaq-e-biddat and try to understand the practice, construct, and interpretation of talaq-e-biddat in the Indian society. In conclusion, the paper contends that while there has been a dynamic change in the MPL in India, there is a need to refer to the sources of personal laws and try to bring the change from within the system rather than constitutional interpretation. And keywords Muslim personal laws, India, Talaq-e-Bittat, history, Supreme Court. Now, let me break this down for you and why I like writing this way and how this has helped me. So, if you have a look at this abstract, there are a few things that I've done. First, I have laid out my research question, and I have also laid out what all I will be looking into in the first paragraph itself, the first top paragraph. And then in the second paragraph, I have provided um, a paragraph, chapter by chapter summary of what all is mentioned. I'm forgetting the name that was given to this. Apologies. Um, it was called something. I'm forgetting. But basically, what I've done is I have given a basic outline of what each of my chapters or headings will be looking at. Signposting, apologies. So, signposting, where I have told you that chapter one is looking at an introduction, chapter two is looking at how research scholars have considered Muslim personal laws to be static, but through my research, I proved that they have been dynamic. Chapter 3, I have looked at the different sources of Muslim personal laws to test the validity of talaq-e-biddat. Chapter 4, I have looked at the cases related to talaq-e-biddat. And in conclusion is where I have given my research and my opinion, and that is my what my entire paper is around, which is in conclusion, the paper contends that while there has been a dynamic change in the Muslim personal laws in India, there is a need to refer to the sources of personal laws and to bring the change from within the system rather than constitutional interpretation. Basically, being that for talaq-e-biddat, it could have been invalidated through Muslim personal laws itself, which it did not do. The court did it through constitutional interpretation. And so my opinion was that it could be done through the sources of personal laws itself. So as you can see, I have given line by line every single thing that each of my headings will do. And so if someone wants to look at the cases of triple talaq, if they read through this, they'll realize that chapter 4 talks about all of the cases. And so they would want to read it. Even my research question and the answer is given over here. So if someone actually wants to see how I prove that Muslim personal laws has undergone dynamic change, they will read this because I have given that to you. And very importantly, the keywords are very important because you would want to keep some keywords that are very easy to Google. And why I'm saying this is because not only your keywords, but also the title of your research paper, it needs to be something that is very easy to find. Because if it's not easy to find, many people won't even read it. So, to give an example, and I remember this very vividly when I was a first year student, I remember there was another person who had written a really great article. The person wrote a great article. However, the title that the person gave to that article, and this was an international relations topic of China and India, it was something along the lines of the dancing dragon and the something elephant and the relations between them. Now, if I'm on Google and if I want to look at India-China relations, I will not type dancing dragon and something elephant. I will type India-China relations, international relations, or something, diplomacy. So you would want to have certain keywords that are something that everyone would Google. And I think for this topic, Muslim personal laws, India, talaq-e-biddat, history, Supreme Court, triple talaq would be words that they would Google. And because of that, the visibility of your research paper also increases. And that also means more people are reading it and maybe more people will cite it as well. And I have been very fortunate in that regard as well, that at least many of my papers have been quite visible in that way. That being said, an abstract is very important. 200, 250 words. Again, it depends upon journal to journal. And so we will have a look at journals in a while. Second thing, methodology. And what is a methodology? How do you add this in a research paper? And does it always have to be a different heading? Are questions that come for methodology. The answer to this is that there, of course, are different types of methodologies. Basically, your quantitative research, qualitative research, doctrinal research, non-doctrinal research, ethnographical research. There are many different types of research methodologies. And I don't think I will honestly have the time to even go through this. I feel like I've had 3 to 4 hour sessions where I've only done an introduction to methodologies talking about these. So let's just skip a bit past that and let's go to the next question, which is these are different methodologies. How do you add this in a research paper and does it always have to be a different heading? And I think these are very important questions because as I'm assuming that most of us are law or social science faculty, and to for us, mostly our research is doctrinal research. We are looking at secondary research, we're looking at other research papers, maybe we're looking at texts, but it's mostly desk-based research. We're not actually doing field-based research. And when we're doing that, it's doctrinal research. Most of the times, we think that we don't require a methodology. However, I would want to say that a methodology is actually important. And I'm not saying that you always have to make it a different heading itself. It can be a 1 to 2 paragraph explanation of the methodology within the introduction as well. But I believe that it is important because it gives clarity to the readers of how you came up with your opinion and your arguments. So, just to run through these, because I don't think I would want to spend time on methodology over here. But in methodology, doctrinal research is basically the theoretical study that we do mostly on secondary sources of data, while empirical research or non-doctrinal research is basically our field research, where which is also called fact research. And in this, we do doctrinal research, but apart from that, there is qualitative and quantitative studies. Qualitative research basically answering the question of why. Quantitative is basically you're developing this numerical picture and always bringing in the numbers. And I don't think I would have the time to go into all of these, but I would be happy to discuss them sometime later. However, it is not important to always have non-doctrinal research in your research paper to make it good. And why I'm saying this is because non-doctrinal research always has an added advantage because it shows that you have done some research on the field. However, it's not always required, is what I will say, but adding the methodology is required. Now, let me show you. Let's not compare. Let me just show you. I'll get to this in the next one. Let me just show you this example. And I've kind of had to cut down on places here and there because this is still not published yet. So I just removed some parts of this. So this is actually, let's say, a doctrinal study that I am doing, but it's a mixed method that I have actually added some interviews into it so that I have both of the types of. So if we have a read, this research will include a qualitative doctrinal study to analyze XYZ. This will primarily rely on legal and policy review and empirical insights to examine ABC. So basically, primarily this is doctrinal research, which has also been mentioned in the second paragraph. The research will rely on doctrinal and comparative legal analysis by assessing national legal frameworks governing environmental adjudication in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, the three South Asian countries that have established specialized environmental tribunals. It will analyze XYZ, blah, 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 comparing them with international tribunal models such as EU, Australia, and will also be examined to determine best practices in South Asia. Then comes the next part. An empirical study will complement the findings through semi-structured interviews and surveys targeting key stakeholders such as environmental lawyers, judges, policymakers, academics, and environmental activists. The study will employ a non-probability sampling with the use of the snowballing technique to identify experts with specialized knowledge of environment law and specialized tribunal functioning. Surveys will be designed with a mix of common and customized questions. The research will also need access to databases such as Hein Online, JSTOR, SCC Online, etc. Case law, tribunal rulings, and secondary literature from these sources will be reviewed. The research aims to provide a robust framework for XYZ. Now, if we remove the non-doctrinal element, which is the third paragraph, I still have 2 or 3 paragraphs of a methodology, even in doctrinal research. And this just goes to show that even if you are doing desk-based doctrinal research, you can still have a proper methodology heading if you want to make one. Or what I usually do is I incorporate this at the end of the introduction. But why is this important? This is important because as you can see from here as well, even though I've cut some parts out, um, it shows a proper structure of how I conducted my research, what all I did. And I think that is very important in the research paper. And just to come back here, can there be ethical considerations in your research? Of course. Whenever you do interviews, I think it's very important to have informed consent. If the person requires confidentiality, that is also very important. And also familiarize yourself with the research ethics and obtain all the approvals that you might require from your institution. It's very important to follow these norms whenever you're conducting interviews. So please keep those in mind. And finally, the last part that I want to look at in the structure, so I'll go through this in the next, let's say, 5 minutes, is literature review. And why is literature review important? Of course, a literature review is a critical analysis of the existing scholarly research on that specific topic. And so, a literature review really helps you identify the gaps that are there in the existing research. What does this mean? Um, I think this photo kind of gave me the best example, and this is what one of my, um, let's say, seniors over here in Jindal taught me, and it really made a lot of sense. So, imagine all the past research to be the runway, and basically the place where the literature review ends and where you get your research question is where the takeoff happens, where there is no research anymore available. So the literature review is kind of your base, the runway, and the question that has not been answered by those papers is the takeoff, which is your research question. Now, is the literature review required in all papers? It's not required in all papers. Do only books and journal articles count as literature review? Yes, they do, but in some very rare occasions, you can use other sources, but it is advisable to use journal articles and books. How does this help in the research? Just to take the same analogy, it shows you what all has been done in this area and what has not been answered. And that is why literature review is very important. And this is why, if you have a very good literature review, along with your methodology and a great research topic, I feel like your paper can very easily get published in great journals. So, literature review is not necessarily required. Books and journal articles are not the only thing that count as literature review. However, for all intents and purposes, I would say yes, you should only be using books and journal articles. And how does this help? It's because, as you can see here, building a research on and relating it to existing knowledge is the building block of all academic research activities, regardless of discipline. Therefore, to do so accurately should be a priority for all academics. However, this task has become increasingly complex. Knowledge production is accelerating at a tremendous speed, while at the same time reimagining fragmented and interdisciplinary. This makes it hard to keep up with state-of-the-art research and to be at the forefront, as well as to assess the collective evidence in a particular research area. This is why a literature review as a research method is more relevant than ever, because a literature review can broadly be described as a more or less systematic way of collecting all the research that is in that area, synthesizing it, and then showing how your research question has not been answered by the past literature. And so there are a couple of important questions to consider for each step of a literature review. First, design. Is the review needed and what is the contribution of conducting this review? And I think that this should always be answered in the positive, that it is always required in the research paper to show why your idea is novel. If you go back to the golden triangle that I spoke about, what is the potential audience of this review? Of course, I think I'll get to this as well. Where are you writing and who are you writing for becomes important. And what is the specific purpose and research question you are addressing, which we have already answered in the first step. And what is the specific strategy you're using for the review? How many are you going to add in the review, which comes in the second, which is the conduct. So how will you select which articles to use? How will the search process and selection be documented? And how will the quality of the search process and selection be assessed? It's very important that just because you're writing on a topic, and I'm going back to marital rape, you cannot look at all of the hundreds of thousands of articles in marital rape. You would want to look at the best quality 10, 20 articles in that area. So how do you plan this out and how do you document this? It's very important and it all falls part in the literature review. And how do you add these sources in the literature review? Do you just mention the name saying that Professor A, Professor B, Professor C have published in this area? Or do you provide an entire summary of the article that Professor A in his paper wrote XYZ, Professor B in her paper wrote XYZ, Professor C wrote this? Or do you have to critically analyze this? And the answer to this would be the third part, because you will not have the space to give a one paragraph summary of each of these. journal articles or books. But what you would have to do is you would have to look at what was the main analysis of those authors and give that in a sentence or two. And talk about how Professor A contends that marital rape should not be criminalized because of these factors. Professor B has looked at why marital rape should be criminalized because of these factors. However, and this is where then your novelty comes. However, Professor A, B, and the other scholars have not looked into this question of marital rape. And this is what I will be looking at, is what you will do in your literature review. So reach from point A to the point where your research question is not answered. And that is what is the importance of a literature review. And then, of course, analysis, what type of information needs to be abstracted, what type of information is needed to be conducted. Information is needed to conduct your analysis. This is entirely dependent upon your research question. And of course, when you're writing it, you have to be very clear on how you're writing it and whether it is actually coming out in that. It's very important to be very clear about this. Now, that being said, um, the criteria for evaluation usually that I use are a couple, which is peer review status, author credibility, and publication source. So out of this, basically, if something has been published in a very reputed journal, then I would add that in the literature review. If it has not been published in a very good journal, I would not consider adding that in that literature review. It's very important to look at the quality of the sources. So when I did ask you out of the thousands of articles for marital rape, which one you will add, I think these are very important things. And out of these, I think author credibility would be the least that I would look at from the three, because as I mentioned, even I have seen very great law students publish, which is very interesting because I remember there was this one very influential judgment of 2017 or 18 where a student had published an article or a research paper in a leading Indian law journal that had been cited by the Supreme Court in their landmark judgment. So, Supreme Court did not look at the author. They looked at the peer review status, the publication source, and the arguments that were made by the author. And so it's very important to look at peer review and publication source. Author credibility can be uh, heard if required. And so, of course, identify trends, patterns, and gaps in the existing literature, and this can help you direct your own research. Now, if you have submitted to journals, that's great. Otherwise, this is just some basic information that I wanted to provide of a journal timeline, which is when you submit your paper, it has first an editorial review, and then it's usually sent out to peer review to two people outside of that specific journal. Now, in this, you get a first review and decision, and they ask you to make changes. Then you make the changes, send it back. There's a second review and decision. You make final changes, and then it's published. However, this timeline can take a very long time. From my experience, I think it usually takes 12 to 18 months for really great publications. There might be some that publish faster. However, most of the times I have seen at least 1 year being taken for publications. And peer review is very important in that because it is a process used in academia and scholarly publishing, as we know, where we evaluate the quality and validity of the research papers. So I'm guessing many of you might have acted as peer reviewers for journals. I have acted in many of them as well for as a peer review, and I have provided my opinion on whether they are good topics or not. And what is the purpose of a peer review? Of course, it's quality control. And of course, it is to provide constructive feedback to the from people who are experts in the field. And so it has been very helpful so far. It gives you validation and also helps with dissemination. Now, coming to this, because I think this also becomes a very important part. What all are criterias that are looked at in a peer review, apologies. These are usually some of those that are looked into. And so you should keep in mind that a peer reviewer also does look at grammar and language. As long as the grammar and language is decent, they will not care. However, if it is really below the standard, then they would also talk about that. Logical coherence and legal analysis are very important. And coming back to the golden triangle, the contemporary relevance is very important, contribution to existing literature, and also your referencing, because I have seen that peer reviewers also look at which sources you have referenced. If you've referenced, let's say, a newspaper article or a blog, many times they would add a comment saying, give a journal article because they know that there are journal articles in that area. So, common pitfalls for law journal submissions. I will go through this while I am explaining the criteria to select a suitable law journal. And the questions in this mind, in everyone's mind generally during this is, how do we identify journals? Which ones are good? Are all the journals good? And how should we know where we should send our paper to? And for this, I would always say check the places and what they publish and who are the editors. But that's not all. There are certain other criterias that we have to look at, which include impact factor, audience, scope, and peer review process. Usually we send it out to places that are peer reviewed, so that is fine. We still need to look at the other three, the impact factor, audience, and scope. So with this, let's get into what index law journals are. And in this, while let's say UGC care list might not be something that we need to look at anymore, my university and many universities that I have seen, they do focus on Scopus index journals. And in these indexes, there might be different universities that might have a different outlook to this. Like, for example, from what I know, um, a lot of management schools have ABDC as their factor rather than Scopus. But for us, at least, from what I know, and many other law schools that I have been to, they usually have Scopus as their criteria. So let's talk about what Scopus indexes are. So if I just move here, and if you have a look, this is Scopus. It's basically its website. And on this, there are sources where there are 49,037 journals. That does not mean all of these journals are law journals. We would have to look at subject area and enter law. So basically, while I'm doing this, let me explain. Scopus is basically an index which has hundreds of journals, and Scopus is considered a benchmark in many academic institutions, while maybe, let's say, ABDC or Web of Science is considered a benchmark for many other institutions based upon their own parameters. So, as you can see, when I put law in, I see um, 1,317 journals that fall within the law category that are within Scopus. But that does not mean that you have 1,317 options to publish your paper. Why is that? Again, let's take an example. If I say that I want to look at the research on environmental impact assessment, EIAs, I would want to submit it to a journal that looks at environmental law. Telematics and informatics does not look at environment. Journal of Business Ethics might not look at environment. Computer and security might not look at environment. So most of these journals will not actually look at environment law. And also importantly, all 1317 of these are not actually indexed in Scopus at this moment in time. And for that, I can take you to the last slide to show you. So I've opened 200 of these. So if we go to the, let's say, fifth one, so that will be your number 801 to 1000. And if we have a look at these journals, there is one very important thing that I usually look at to determine whether they're still part of Scopus or not. I think they've removed the last one over here. So I'll show that maybe somewhere else. Let me just show you this then, if all of these are fine. Rather than looking at a subject area, what I like to do is, let me close this and let's search by title. I usually like to search by title. Now, let's say that I want to write on environmental law. So I'll write environmental law. Apologies, I think my laptop's a bit slow right now. And now when I find the sources, It will search for journals that have written environmental or law. Let me write this again. Sometimes I don't know why they make this an issue. But of course, I do know that there are journals that have environmental and law in it. This is how I did search for many journals where I did publish by environmental law. So now, if we have a look, we know that there are 30 results. Now, in those 30 results, if we have a look at the names of them, Journal of Environmental Law, Transnational Environmental Law, Review of European Comparative and International Environmental Law. So now we do see a lot of journals that are talking about environmental law. And in this, there is one journal I know is there, which is, let's say, Asia Pacific Journal of Environmental Law. Now, if I'm looking at a topic of environmental impact assessment in India, I think Asia Pacific Journal of Environment Law is quite pertinent because Asia, so India being within Asia, and environment law, environmental impact assessment. Couple of things to note before you send your articles to these journals is always have a look at the year that it is indexed in Scopus. So over here, we see that it is indexed in 2025. So it will be indexed this year if I publish in this journal this year. And apart from that, always look at this, the publisher, because it's very important. And I'll give you an example for this. So just last week, I think it was, for my elective course in general, we were identifying journals for them to publish in. I usually promote my students to publish. So for my course on ASEAN law and policy, this was one journal that came up, which was an interesting journal, which is indexed in Scopus. So I opened it up. It's the International Journal of Law and Society that is indexed in Scopus this year. So I Googled it, International Journal of Law and Society. I opened the first link. It took me over here. Everything sounds good by this. I mean, I think everything's great. However, we've fallen prey to something that's very important over here. Have a look at who the publisher is over here. It's CV Najaha. Look over here. The second journal is the International Journal of Law and Society, which is by Najaha. And if you open this up, you will see that this journal is different from that other journal. So that journal, the first one, which on Google came up number one, is not actually the Scopus Index journal. It's this journal that is the Scopus Index journal. So it's very important to do your due diligence on this to understand which journal you're sending it to. And this, I'm not sure, would be a classic example of a cloned journal. However, there are many such journals that are called cloned journals that use the same name, and through certain metrics, they get their link at the top of the Google search so that whenever you Google, the first one is usually the clone journal, while the second one is actually the Scopus journal. So please be very wary of these things when you're searching for journals. So coming back, those are things that you have to look at over here. Now, this being said, even though I've mentioned it over here, and if you have a look, things that we have to look at are impact factor, audience, scope, and peer review. Now, I believe that there is no one size fits it all for journal articles. It is always something that you have to decide what you think is more important. Why I'm saying this, I can give you an example for this. So let's take these three examples of NUJS Law Review, Journal of India, Journal of Law and Justice, Indian Journal of Law and Justice, and the Indian Law Review. Now, why am I taking these three examples? Let's say you've written an article that is related to India, and it fits all three of these because, again, it's an Indian topic. Aims and scope, I'll get to in a minute. Let's say it fits all of the aims and scope. However, now, what is the motivation behind your publication is very important. Why I say this? Because let's say maybe I care about my appraisal at my university, and because my university, let's say, would care about um, Scopus Index publications, maybe your university cares about Scopus Index publications. So you would want to publish in Scopus. Now, out of these three, Indian Journal of Law and Justice and Indian Law Review are Scopus Index journals. So you would maybe consider publishing in these two journals. However, as I gave you the example of a journal and the student who had written in that journal that was cited in a landmark judgment, that was through NUJ's law review. And that was not the only time that the Supreme Court has cited NUJ's law review articles. The Supreme Court, on multiple occasions, has actually cited NUJ's law review articles. So, if you're thinking about the outreach and the impact that it might have on the Indian society in India itself, maybe NUJ's law review would be a better avenue for that. Very similarly, let's say maybe taking the example of any topic, let's just say, let's go back to marital rape or 377 again. If it's an idea that you really want there to be a dissemination of knowledge within the Indian circuit, where obviously judges as well as lawyers are reading this because it's also open access, you would want to send it to NUJ's law review. But at the end of the day, if you do really care about, let's say, appraisals, and for that, if you really have to publish in certain indexes, then you might want to publish it in Indian Journal of Law and Justice or Indian Law Review. However, do note that while you have an option to publish open access, usually, unless if you have an institutional tie-up, it does cost a lot of money. So it will be behind a paywall. So your outreach will also be limited in these journals. So the motivation that you have for publishing is very important over here as to why do you want to publish. If it's for an appraisal, then you go for Scopus, go for any Scopus based upon the factors that your university asks for you. If you want to go for visibility, then go for open access journals, go for journals that might be like, let's say, NUJ's Law Review, NLSIR, I think it is, maybe let's say some other journals that might be there by other law schools in India, or maybe let's say even the Indian Law Institute has their own journals. So you'd want to publish in those places so that there is better accessibility. And what I usually do is I actually have a blend of this. That let's say I have published 40 or 50 journal articles so far. So I have a blend of maybe let's say 20 Scopus journals because of course I also care about my appraisal. However, the remaining 20 or 30 have been published in open access journals, um, so that there is a dissemination of knowledge. So let's say one of my latest articles was an open access research that I had done, which was published by the ICAI over here. So open access research that has been published, it has been published in a very prestigious place by ICAI, and so there will be a dissemination of knowledge within India for that. However, that's not Scopus, and so it's not helping me with my appraisal. So I have that mix and a blend that I do. And so it's very important that you also understand why you want to do the research and where you want to publish. So coming back, it's very important to identify a couple of things as you can see over here. So indexes, it all depends upon why you want to publish, where you want to publish. Moving on, it's all very important to look at submission guidelines. Now, coming back over here, let's just take the example of this journal, Asian Journal of International Law. This is a journal of my alma mater, National University of Singapore. So aims and scope, which was part of this session as well, is very important. And that is a common pitfall that I see. Now coming to pitfalls, that we usually tend to send our papers to journals without actually looking at the aims and scope and the submission requirements. So it's very important that you understand the aims and scope as well as the journal requirements. So if we have a look at Asian Journal of International Law and go to journal information, so over here in the about the journal, we see, let's see where it would be, author instructions. Two things that we need to look at are preparing your materials, the style and structure used by the journal. So it is very important that we look at how many words can we actually write? Is there a specific structure that they're asking for? And is there any specific referencing style that they've asked for? So Asian Journal of International Law publishes 8,000 to 12,000 words, excluding footnotes. However, they also publish 3,000 to 5,000, which are notes and comments. So they publish both of them. Now, if you've written, let's say, 10,000 words and there is a journal that only accepts until 8,000 words, they will not accept this paper of yours because it is above the word count. And not just that, journals are very specific on their style and structure requirements. If, let's say, Asian Journal has asked for Oscola and you have given them APA, they will ask you to revise that, unless specifically they have mentioned over here that they are okay with it. And again, another thing that's important to look at is the aims and scope. Let's look at Indian Law Review to understand their aims and scope. So, as you can see, aims and scope are here. Indian Law Review is an academic-led, double anonymized, peer-reviewed generalist journal on the laws of the Indian subcontinent. The objects and purposes of the journal are to publish peer-reviewed scholarship about the laws of the Indian subcontinent, spanning all areas of law, including comparative perspectives that engage with the laws of the Indian subcontinent. So, this is a journal about India. I cannot write a topic on Bangladesh or Bhutan and publish it over here unless there is a comparison with India. So it's very important to always read the aims and scope because right now it might sound very simple when I'm saying this. However, let's take the example of some other journals like, let's say, maybe there is this journal called South Asia Review, which is also a Taylor Francis journal, which is Scopus indexed. So if we have a look at this, again, from the name itself, we can guess that this looks at South Asia. However, will this take South Asian law topics is a question. For that, we need to look at the aims and scope to understand whether they'll actually publish a law topic. So if we have a look, areas of interest, we don't actually see law over here if you go through this. So most of the times they would reject law papers. So it's very important to look at the aims and scope to understand whether this journal will actually take your article based on the aims and scope. And many a times I have seen a lot of people get rejected from journals because they did not comply with the aims and scope, with the structure requirements, or their paper did not fit within the aims and scope. Hence, these are two common pitfalls that I have seen when people submit to these type of journals. And it's always I always give this advice that you should always start with the best journals out there and see what they respond. And of course, I have this common habit that let's say in case, let's say something has been rejected, I always ask for feedback, rework on it, and send it to the next place, which would be the second best place. And just doing this, I keep on working on it, and eventually my articles always get published. And so that is why I think how this is a kind of a cycle that I have. Very similar to, I think this was the movie 12th Fail, which was, I think, last year. It came out last year, where they have this song Restart, where the person who is a UPSC aspirant restarts every next year and actually works and studies again, prepares for the exams. Very similarly, I do this for journal articles as well, where if I write one article, I send it out, and then I continue working on the second article while this is in review. If it is rejected, I ask for feedback, rework on it, resend it out again. And I think that is very important habit to have in academia because even at whatever stage you are, there might be certain things that need to change in the paper. And apart from clone journals, there is something called predatory journals as well. Usually, you would not want to pay for your journal articles. And a lot of places, again, remember, just having indexes is not a very big thing, I would say. And this is just one example I usually use. There are hundreds of these type of journals. If let's not look at the name, let's just look at how they sell it. The features of the journal, they have been indexed in 30 databases, including Hein Online, Manupatra, which is great, but any journal can do that. If I start a journal within half a year, hopefully, I can get them indexed in most of the places. But apart from that, it looks very sketchy that within 3 to 5 days, you get the review and they get published. And that too, they have an article processing charge, which is somewhere over here. And I believe, and I would recommend that you do not publish in any place that asks for an article processing charge. You can always publish in places free of charge, which will be way better and will have a better benefit not only for your own profile but also in getting noticed as well. So as you can see, this is 1,150 rupees or $25. This is just one journal that does this. There are many journals that do this. Do not do this. Try to go for journals like, let's say, that are within Scopus, or if not, I usually have this rule of thumb that I like publishing in journals that are backed by law schools. So even if it is not a Scopus journal, as I told you, I have a blend of Scopus and the other types of journals. I usually tend to publish in law school journals. So for example, one of my recent articles has just been published in NLIU Law Review, which is NLIU Bhopal, one of the NLUs. So I think that that's a great place to publish as well. So I send it out over there in law school journals. That is 100 times better than predatory journals. Cloned is the example that I gave you just a while back. So these are types of journals that you would want to avoid. Try to publish without having to pay, because at the end of the day, it is your intellectual labor that has gone into it. So why is it that you have to pay money to publish it as well? You shouldn't have to pay money to publish these things. Actually, just to come back to this, you don't have to pay for this. There are many journals that actually pay you to publish as well. So, for example, let's say ICAI that I was talking about, they actually provide a remuneration for anyone who publishes with them. There was a journal that I had written for in Nepal. There are quite a few over there. They actually pay you to publish with them. So that is a good practice, not you paying to publish. And so it's very important to understand the aims and scopes of the journal and also go through the guidelines to make the paper as per their required standard. And I think with that, it's also very important, as I haven't mentioned this, but I think it's very important that collaboration and networking really help. I don't think it's worded right over here, so I'll just move ahead. But collaboration, I feel like, has really helped me in the sense that it gives a sense of check and balance that I have to work on time because the other person has also worked on time. And it does help me work on more papers at a faster rate. So if I can only work on maybe one or two research papers in a year alone, maybe through collaboration with two or three people, I can work on five or six topics in a year. So collaborating really has helped me in that way, where I have been able to produce more research with really great minds across the world, actually, not just India, even other countries as well. And so I would recommend that. And finally, just remember to ensure a flow in your paper. Always make it specific and remember that the paper needs to be coherent. The writing style depends upon where you send it. If it is a law journal, you can make it more legal writing heavy. If it is a social science journal, you would still have to explain all of the doctrines, topics, legal maxims, etc., and always back it by evidence. And it's very important to have ethical writing. It's very important to have original writing without plagiarism. And wherever you have taken an idea from someone, give proper attribution. And also very important not to use AI LLMs like ChatGPT because it will not help you in the long run if you use ChatGPT. It's very easy to identify the writing and it takes away from your own writing style and your own ingenuity as well. And lastly, it's very important to proofread your work for readability, specificity, and errors. That being said, I see Dr. Gupta is also on screen now. So that is all for now. Hopefully, I've been able to help with this very little aspect that I was explaining so far on how to write and what all should be part of the research paper and how to select your journals. I would be very much happy to take any questions if we have time for questions, and also later on if you ever have questions along the road. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Harsh, for your insightful session and practical experience that you have been doing since your law school days. We'll take a couple of questions only because already we have exceeded time. So, what's your opinion about journal publishing of article? How authenticity are such journal? How to verify the same? And related to paid journal, it's good or bad? Sometimes they ask. I think you
Okay.
earlier also asked. It's not
Yes.
bad that somebody's asking for money. So, your views on that?
So I would always, so the way that I select journals is that there are a couple of things that I keep as red flags. And an article processing charge most of the times is a red flag in my head because, as I mentioned, why would you want to publish somewhere where they are asking you for money when there are so many other places that pay you to actually publish with them? So I totally agree that all of the places are not bad that are asking for article processing charges. However, this is something that is to think about, right? That many places will publish it for free. Some places will even give you money to publish. So why is it that you would want to publish in a place where you are paying from your pocket? So while I'm not saying all of them are bad, this is something that you can keep in mind. And this is just my opinion, of course, in this.
Yeah. So I got once money. That's Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, the IPS Academy,
Ah, yes, yes,
Hyderabad.
yes,
They
yes,
pay 5,000 rupees. So first time in life this happened. So I asked for account number,
yes,
and then we were two, my friends, we were in GNLU.
yeah.
So they asked for account number. Then we were surprised. पैसे भी मिल रहे. So
Exactly. So
then
I've actually received money for like 4 or 5 of my journal articles. So I always love it when they give you money because it feels so nice that they're rewarding you for your efforts.
Yeah, we
So
all are so happy,
to
na, getting money. Kalpesh sir is smiling like I got 5,000. He's smiling.
no, that was
That
very surprising because we
that
are
was it is
paying
yes, yes.
nobody, hardly
exactly.
very few, and because again
Correct.
the budget issues are there. So
Of
it's good,
course.
Yes.
So
encouragement. I
so
We
for
are
remember
example,
motivated to write more better work. This is
exactly,
what I
exactly.
feel.
Yes.
I remember like Rashtriya Raksa Shakti University that at
Yes, yes,
Gandhinagar, RRU,
yes.
under the Ministry of Home Affairs. They also book publications. They have good amount of budget. So these things are there. So it's very, I think, encouraging for all of us,
Exactly.
because people are not very well aware about whether we are getting money or not. We have to pay money.
Yes.
So these things are there. So
Yes.
Yes, sir, abhi tak I was only like, कि yes, we only have to pay the money for the paper. We don't
Yeah.
get the money for the paper. No, it's good that we are also
So there
getting the
are
money for.
there
Yeah.
are a few journals that do this, and it's very important to highlight these journals because it is a very novel, it is a very noble approach to publishing where
Correct.
they are actually rewarding you for publishing with them. So
Yeah.
I think it's very important to actually identify all of them and publicize them because at the
Yes.
end of the day, these are great places as well.
yeah.
Yes.
We'll take up last question. Can systematic SLR, systematic literature review methods like PRISM and the spare SLR be used in legal research paper?
So I have never used any of these softwares. Even for referencing, when people say that they use Zotero and other approaches, I have never been able to use them for some reason or the other. That is a me problem, I would say, that I know that Zotero at least is very helpful and works, but I have never been able to actually get in line with using them because when I have used them in the past, I have seen that they have messed up my citations as well. And so I won't be able to comment much on it because I myself have not used those
Yes.
softwares.
Yeah, definitely. I also relate with hers. It's really taking away your intelligence. We are using AI,
Yes.
other thing, tools. We are totally depending upon anyway. Like I would say, so that's why I am also legally
Yes.
people. Sir, ये use करो, वो use करो नहीं. I just write, right?
Exactly.
The
So,
the technically what we are doing for
yes.
years. It's
So
a
my research papers, I have like 100 citations, and I know I have 100 citations. It'll take me a while, but because I have been working on them for so long, it does not really take me that much time to do the citations now by myself. So I might take, let's say, 2 hours or 3 hours to do my citations, which is fine by me. I don't think that's too much of time.
yeah,
So I have always been of the approach of not using these and doing it by myself itself. So I can't actually comment on these.
yeah,
Apology.
yeah. Anyway, at least share your experience. It's messed up your citation also. Totally depending upon it will be piled up at the end or wherever you want to go, and then something.
Yes.
So yeah, I've been also not in favor, I would say. So mechanically, manually I do सोच के what we have been doing for years. So it's up to somebody's choice. So no comments on that.
Hmm.
So thank you very much, Harsh. I think we have already exceeded time. So thank you very much, Harsh,
Okay.
for your constant support. There are few resource person in I would say including Harsh. They are regular resource person in almost all the programs. So we are grateful for your wonderful time and then insightful session. So thank you very much,
Thank you
Harsh.
so much. Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
sir, for
Thank you.
a very informative session and a very good presentation. There are many things which all the participants are really going to have a look on by this presentation. Thank you, Kalpesh sir, for
Thank you.
bringing her sir on the RNTU and Law Teachers platform. Thank you so much, all the participants. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.